Thanks. It's really great to be here, and like a community like this is so valuable. I kind of wish that I'd kind of grown up as an engineering manager with this kind of support. So I guess to get started, like the thing I had in mind to talk about was some of the things that I've learned that I think are important parts of our culture that help us attract engineers, great engineers. But to start, I'll wind back the clock a little bit. About 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, I left what I think was a really good job in Amazon, like one of the greatest companies on paper of our generation, to join a startup that like had, no customers, no money. At a time in my life when I just had a second kid and probably should have been sensible in a whole bunch of ways. But so why did I do that? It was pretty simple. I've always realized that like life is pretty short and can disappear in a moment, and not to waste it on doing things that aren't really fully aligned with your passion. So I left a good job chasing a dream job. And for me, that was a couple of simple things. It was working with people who like inspired me, who I really believed in, who believed in me and who would push me to be a better version of myself. To work on a problem I really believed in, something that it was an itch that I had. I wanted to solve it. It wasn't just another job or whatever. And to work in a way that I felt I could have the greatest impact. And I joined that team, and the first few months were incredible. I think in the first 6 weeks I probably felt I did more and was prouder of the work I'd done in the first 6 weeks than like 6 months at Amazon. And I felt I was doing good work there too. And what quickly dawned on me was like two things. I had this opportunity in joining this team, this company that felt like it had great potential. And also this realization I had that I'd been like pretty underwhelmed and dissatisfied with most companies I'd been part of. So I kind of had this opportunity, and my kind of personal mission formed around this, and I wanted to grow a company, or like an engineering team specifically perhaps, and be part of creating an environment that, should I have been back at any point in my career, it would be the company that hands down I'd pick to be part of. And I think if you're thinking about what's important when you're trying to attract engineers, a useful exercise is to put yourself in those shoes again. So with that perspective, with putting yourself in the shoes of the people you want to attract, there's like 4 points that I thought would be useful to talk about that, again, may not be relevant to everyone here, but certainly are strong contributors to our culture and how we've attracted people. The first one resonates strongly with a bunch of what Luke said, which is, number one, I think, is having a big and exciting challenge ahead of you. And a lot of companies talk about what they do, and again, to use Luke's example, it would be like, oh, we build an app for hailing cabs, and that's okay. It can understand it, but it's not inspiring. It doesn't tell a big story about the future. Great companies, I think, do tell a story about the future. They say why they exist and what change they want to make in the world. And like the number one, starting point, I think, bit of advice for anyone here is to start with that. Make sure you can tell a compelling story about your company and why you exist, not what you do. And there's many great examples of this in the past and current, present. Microsoft had a wonderful mission to put a computer on every desk, and Facebook's to make the world more open and connected. When you look at Facebook's, on the surface, they build a social network, or at least that's what most people describe them as in the years gone by. But when you look at their roadmap for the years ahead, they're building lasers and satellites and drones and AR and VR and all this crazy stuff. But it all makes sense in the context of why they exist. And they might be the things that connect a further billion people in the world. So, and this idea of like why, like what problem are we solving and why, permeates through our culture. And like every single time anyone's taking on some work, I gather there's a funny question behind me. No. So this idea of why, like what problem are you solving and why, it permeates through everything we do. So if a team are solving a problem, the most critical thing is to start with that clear and shared understanding amongst everybody of what problem you're solving and why, rather than like what solution are you trying to build or whatever. So that's the first thing. The second thing that's been like critically important and kind of riffs on the statement I made about first 6 weeks versus 6 months at Amazon is to minimize friction in how you work. And it's kind of a scary thought that when you look at everything from process, the amount of code you have, the length of time it takes to run your tests, how long it takes to deploy, all these different things, the default is that they all get worse and longer and harder over time. And as they do, it gets harder to have impact and less fun to do your work and harder to attract people. And that's kind of scary and sobering. And very, very early on, we invested what was probably a bit maybe irresponsible at the time, but it paid off dramatically. We invested a lot in minimizing our cost and friction around deployment. And we took what was typically a terrifying / exciting / adventurous thing full of risk and made it really boring and trivial, and such that it happens hundreds of times a day, or it's just a thing that happens that no one even knows about. Happens on Fridays, happens at dinner time on Fridays. And the interesting thing here isn't that we've removed friction from engineers' lives. It's actually the larger consequences of that and how it affected the whole company to work. And most significantly, it altered how we could approach problems. And we have this basic framework for approaching problems, which might feel familiar to people, which is to think big, to think about the whole breadth of the problem that you might want to solve, but to start small, to pick the one bit that the one first step which will help you learn what the next right step is, and to repeat that again and again and again. And that's not just an engineering thing, that's a thing that involves everyone in your company quite often. And so this act of deploying and shipping code to people and getting used in a whole bunch of ways enabled us to approach problems differently across the whole company. And it's like a massive part of how we work. We use phrases like ship to learn. We say that shipping's the heartbeat of our company. It breathes life into teams, momentum and energy and excitement. But it all came from this drive to reduce friction. And the kind of takeaway for me is that if you can reduce friction, often you create opportunities to do things far, far greater in ways that are bigger than the problem you solved initially. The third thing that I was going to talk about is working with the right people. And I think, as a force of attraction to people in companies, and clearly, I would consider it table stakes that as an engineer, you would want to work with other great engineers, and we should all strive for that. But the thing that actually attracted me more in the early days and is a kind of binding force, remains a binding force, is the idea of working with great people in other disciplines. Because any company here that is building something, it's quite likely the sum of more than just engineering's input. It's design and research and analysts and product managers and a whole bunch of people with different disciplines. And I actually get way more excitement out of working with that kind of mix of people and prioritize that ahead of the table stakes of working with great engineers. And again, this sort of different things work for different companies, but for us, when we look at other companies, a lot of companies put those people apart. They separate them into silos, into different departments. And each of those silos results in handovers and longer feedback loops. So for us, it's simple. We just put, for a team that own a thing, they have all those people together. And that first step of putting them together can often be superficial. So what we talk about is, and if I had a diagram, it would help, but as a Venn diagram, we all overlap, and the magic or the opportunity on a team is to focus on how you overlap with other disciplines. The more empathy and understanding you can have for the designer you work with or the researcher you work with, the more you can shorten those feedback loops and get to the right solution. So that was the third thing. The fourth thing is, so if you accept or subscribe to the idea that everything's getting worse all the time unless you fight against it, which I think is a healthy assumption, you know, then I think a thing that's important and that you know, I put a lot of effort and time into thinking about is how can we empower everybody in the company to feel a sense of responsibility, expectation, empowerment to see things in their environment that are suboptimal and to fix them or improve them. You can't, none of us can do this alone. I can't even do it with my direct team or all the managers in the company. So you got to find ways to include everybody. And you know, again, let's assume all of our companies are broken in many different ways. When you have people that are experiencing that, you want them to not react in a "this is shit" and get frustrated and disgruntled, and if you're lucky, tell you. But you want them to react in a "oh, wait a minute, there's a thing we can make better here," and have a path to helping contribute to making that thing better. And that kind of mindset shift might be referred to as like acting as leaders, not victims. And it's kind of on us to empower that, because it's very unrealistic to expect that to happen unless you sort of pave the way for people on that. So that's it really. That's all I want to say. I had 4 things. You know, frame your problem well. Why you exist, not what you do. Remove friction. Friction pisses people off, makes work less fun. Work with the right people, put them together so they can be more effective, and empower everyone to solve your problems. Don't put it all on your own shoulders. Thanks. Okay, so we'll skip the first question. I have been asked, am I the guy from Coldplay before as well? I forget his name. Intercom has a great product culture. How does the tech people interact with product people, I presume, is the question. We have this, like, from inception thing where I guess part of the DNA is like tech and product being very close and very overlapping and blurred together. It probably comes from the founding team. You know, the Owen and Des are probably identify as designers, but have backgrounds in engineering as computer scientists. I've like a strong engineering background, but always had curiosity and at least self-awareness that I'm a bad designer. But the kind of makeup of our organization has always leaned on that, where we've engineer leaders and product leaders working in partnership. And that's reflective right the way through the org. And it works well for us. Harder to find a good engineer or to convince him or her to join your company? I don't know, they can both be hard at times. Like normally if someone has got to the point of talking to you, then they're there for a reason and they're excited about your company already. But going out cold to people who've never heard of you can be really, really hard and takes a lot of practice, and I can't claim to be particularly good at it. Finding good engineers is also tremendously hard. Like by the numbers, I'm sure we all talk to many dozens of people to find the one person that we're excited about. I don't know if there's any easy answers to either of those. How much have you ever paid for a great engineer? Maybe, yeah, I don't know. Like, don't know how to answer that. Maybe more than I got paid. I don't know if that's a good answer. What are your best tricks to source engineers? I heard someone else, I think Luke again, say this, like a thing that Intercom have always done a lot of is share how we think about things, and in a way that we think if we're the other side of the table that we would be interested in wanting to learn more. That good? Cool.